One fateful evening, Jake was wrapping up a long day at the office. He'd stayed late, alone, finishing up some last-minute tasks. Just as he was grabbing his coat, ready to head out, he felt an eerie sensation, like he was being watched. Before he could react, several dark figures appeared out of nowhere, rushing up behind him. He barely had time to turn when rough hands grabbed him, yanking him backward. Jake struggled, twisting to get a look at who they were, but all he could see were masked faces in the shadows. A cloth was thrown over his head, and his arms were wrenched back and tied. Jake tried to shout, to fight, but there were too many of them. They overpowered him easily, shoving him forward as he stumbled. The sound of a van door sliding open sent a chill down his spine. With no warning, they shoved him roughly inside, his body slamming against the cold, hard metal of the van floor. He kicked, trying to push back, but the doors slammed shut, sealing him in darkness. The van roared to life, speeding away as he lay helplessly in the back. They drove for what felt like hours, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional whisper between his captors. As time dragged on, Jake's exhaustion overcame him, and his vision blurred until everything faded. When he finally woke, he found himself lying on a freezing floor. His head throbbed, and he struggled to sit up, trying to make sense of his surroundings. He was in a dark, dingy room. The single, flickering bulb hanging above him cast long, haunting shadows on the crumbling walls. The air was thick with a putrid smell, something rotten and decayed, making his stomach churn. Panicked, he pushed himself up and stumbled to the door, gripping the rusty handle and throwing his weight against it. But the door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard he pushed, kicked, or slammed his shoulder against it, it was as if it were reinforced with steel. Breathing hard, he looked around the room, desperate for something he could use to break out. Then he noticed something on the floor in the corner, a worn, dusty file. Curious and out of options, he picked it up, brushing off the grime. As he flipped through its brittle pages, his heart dropped. It was a list of names. Names he recognized. Every single person on that list had worked at his office. He traced his finger down the list, his stomach twisting as he remembered each name. One by one, they had all died: car accidents, sudden illnesses, bizarre incidents. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, chalking it up to awful coincidences. Then he saw it, his own name, written in bold, right at the bottom of the list. It was the last entry. A shiver ran down his spine as he dropped the file, stumbling back. His mind raced, connecting the horrifying realization. Was he next? He ran back to the door, banging his fists against it, shouting, "Let me out! Someone, please!" His voice echoed through the silence, and for a moment, there was only stillness. Then, he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound of footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate, each step echoing louder than the last. He froze, his heart pounding as he strained to hear. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The door creaked open, and his captors stepped in, their masked faces as cold and unfeeling as before. Without a word, they dragged a large, heavy bag into the room, dropping it with a loud thud in front of him. Jake's mind raced, fear clawing at him as he tried to understand what was happening. He looked up at them, his voice trembling. Why are you doing this? What do you want?" But they just laughed, a low, unsettling sound that echoed through the room. Without a single answer, they turned and left, closing the door and locking it once more. Jake's gaze drifted to the bag in front of him. Suddenly, he heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from inside the bag. His heart pounded as he backed away. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like something was clawing to get out. He moved back until he hit the wall, his eyes fixed on the bag as the fabric started to tear. A pair of skeletal fingers, pale and bony, emerged, ripping through the material with terrifying strength. The bag tore open wider, revealing a creature with hollow, sunken eyes and a gaping mouth full of jagged teeth. Jake felt his breath catch as he watched it pull itself free from the bag, its limbs twisted and unnatural. The creature's head turned slowly, its empty eyes locking onto him with an unsettling hunger. It let out a low, guttural growl, and Jake felt his legs turn to jelly. He scrambled to the door, pounding and screaming, "Please, let me out. Help!" But the door remained solid, his screams swallowed by the thick walls. He glanced back as the creature crawled toward him, its bony fingers scraping the floor, leaving deep scratches in the concrete. In a last, desperate attempt, he slammed his fists against the door, his voice hoarse with terror. "Please! Someone!" But the only response was the creature's raspy breathing as it closed in, its eyes gleaming with malice. The creature lunged, its cold, skeletal fingers digging into his shoulder with a strength that sent pain shooting through his entire body. Jake let out a blood-curdling scream as he felt the creature's jagged teeth close in, its mouth opening wide as it attacked. Late that night, three friends, Michael, Max, and Paul, sat in the tense silence of a group chat, their words heavy with the secret they had vowed never to speak aloud. They had done something unthinkable, something monstrous. Earlier that week, they had killed a girl named Hannah and buried her body in a secluded, forested area miles outside of town. In the aftermath, they'd agreed never to speak of it again. But now, Paul's nerves were unraveling fast. What if the police find her? Paul typed, his fingers shaking as he hit send. His question sat there on the screen, unanswered for several moments, until finally Max responded, his words laced with irritation and anger. "If you don't stop running your mouth, the police won't have to find us." "You're going to get us caught, Paul," Max wrote back, his words cold. "You just keep blabbing and we're all going down." But Paul's fear was too strong to silence. His mind churned with worst-case scenarios, and he couldn't help himself as he started typing again, his thoughts spilling out faster than he could process them. "We killed her, Max. We buried her. But what if someone saw us? What if her parents report her missing? They'll start looking, and they'll keep looking until they find out the truth. What if?" "Enough." Max's text came back in seconds, a response so furious it seemed to burn through the screen. "Stop talking about it, Paul. If you keep this up, I'll make sure you never talk again. You got that?" For a moment, the group chat went silent. Even though they couldn't see one another, they could feel the tension thickening, each of them weighed down by their own guilt and fear. Michael, who had been reading quietly, finally decided to step in. "Both of you, just breathe," he typed. "We agreed to stay calm, remember? No one's going to find out. We were careful. We buried her out there, deep in the woods. It's over." But Paul wasn't comforted. "What if we didn't bury her deep enough?" he replied, his paranoia gnawing at him. "What if part of her body is still above the ground, like her hand or something? What if someone stumbles across it?" Max, who was struggling to keep his own anxiety in check, couldn't take it anymore. "We buried her," he snapped. "We covered every inch of her. No one is going to find anything. Just keep quiet." But Michael, though calm, felt a knot of doubt tightening in his chest. Paul's worry wasn't entirely unfounded. The more he thought about it, the more he felt he had to know for sure. "I'll go back tomorrow," he finally typed. "I'll check the site. Just to make sure nothing's been disturbed. That'll put your mind at ease, Paul." The next morning, Paul was the first to text the group, his message popping up just after dawn. "I had a dream about her last night," he wrote, his words stumbling over one another. "I saw her. She was alive, and she was looking right at me. She was trying to get to me. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." Max, who was growing more exasperated with each passing hour, brushed off his fears. It's just your imagination, Paul. You're letting your nerves mess with your head. There's no way she's alive. But then Michael's message appeared, sending a chill down both of their spines. She's not there, he typed slowly, his message echoing in the silence of the group chat. Her body, it's gone. Max's reply came in almost immediately, the words jagged and furious. What do you mean, gone? We killed her, Michael. We both saw her stop breathing. Are you telling me she just disappeared? Michael's response was filled with a mounting dread. I don't know what to say. I went to the spot where we buried her. I checked every inch of it. There's no trace of her. Max's mind was spinning, his anxiety finally catching up to him. He typed furiously, his words coming in rapid succession. Paul, you didn't tell anyone, did you? You didn't breathe a word of this, right? But there was no response from Paul. The three dots appeared, signaling he was typing, but his reply never came. Frustrated, Max shot another message at him. Paul, say something. Finally, a message appeared. But it wasn't the response they expected. Paul can't answer you right now, the message read, as if it were written by someone else entirely. Max and Michael stared at their screens, frozen with shock and confusion. Max was the first to break the silence. Who is this? There was a pause, and then another message came through, chilling them to the bone. I'm coming for you both, it read. You both will pay for what you did to me. A cold terror washed over Michael as he typed back, his heart hammering. Hannah? Is that you? How are you alive? But instead of an answer, there was only silence. And in that silence, the two of them knew something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Sarah, Chris, Emily, Matt, and Rachel had been planning their weekend getaway for months. The excitement was palpable as they discussed the details one last time in their group chat. But suddenly, Emily interrupted the conversation, her voice filled with concern. Wait, you guys haven't heard the news? She asked, her tone uneasy. There's a serial killer in town. People are disappearing, and no one knows who's next. The others rolled their eyes and laughed it off, dismissing her worries. Come on, Emily, Sarah replied, her voice cheerful and carefree. We've been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A little serial killer isn't going to ruin it for us. Yeah, don't be such a buzzkill, Matt chimed in, his usual bravado shining through. If he shows up, I've got my baseball bat. I'll bash his head in. We're gonna have a blast, so stop worrying. Emily hesitated, glancing at her phone one last time, reading the latest news on the killer's rampage. But in the end, her friends managed to convince her to go along with the trip. Reluctantly, she agreed to join them, putting her fears aside for the sake of the weekend. As they packed into the car the next morning, Sarah took charge of the itinerary. All right, here's the plan, she said with enthusiasm. I've booked us this amazing cabin with a hot tub. Then on Saturday, we'll go hiking, and on Sunday, we'll hit the beach. It's going to be awesome. The drive to Lakeview Lodge was filled with laughter and music, the weight of their worries momentarily forgotten. Upon arriving, they wasted no time settling in. The lodge was quaint and picturesque, tucked away in the mountains with a stunning view of the surrounding forest. The group spent the afternoon playing games, swimming in the hot tub, and enjoying each other's company, completely unaware of the horrors that lay ahead. Around 2 a.m., a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. It was Matt. The scream jolted everyone awake. Confused and terrified, they stumbled out of their rooms, only to realize Matt was nowhere to be found. Matt? Sarah called out, her voice trembling. They split up to search for him, fear creeping into every step as they moved deeper into the shadowy woods. It was Emily who found him, lying lifeless on the forest floor. Her face turned pale as she realized he was soaked in blood, his baseball bat lying useless beside him. With shaking hands, Emily texted the group, "Guys, Matt is dead." The responses came instantly, disbelieving. "What do you mean?" Sarah replied, dread mounting. "His body is right here." He's gone," Emily responded, her fingers numb. Suddenly, Rachel froze, hearing footsteps crunching through the leaves. She held her breath and quickly hid behind a nearby tree, watching as a shadowed figure moved past her. She could barely make out the large, menacing silhouette, a man with something sharp glinting in his hand. But as she held her breath, praying he wouldn't notice her, her phone started to ring. The sound shattered the silence, and the man turned around, spotting her instantly. Rachel took off running, but it was no use. The killer was fast, his footsteps closing in until she felt him right behind her. With one last, desperate scream, she was silenced. Chris, now on the edge of panic, texted the group, "We need to get out of here, now." He tried to convince Emily and Sarah, but before he could finish the message, Sarah's scream rang out in the distance. The killer had found her. "No!" Chris texted frantically, his mind racing. "Sarah's gone, too. We need to go, now." Emily, trembling with fear, responded, "Tell me where you are, Chris. I'm coming to you." But there was no reply. "Chris? Chris, where are you?" Emily texted again, but still, no response came. Her heart sank. She knew, something had happened to him too. Suddenly, Emily felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She looked over her shoulder and froze. In the distance, she saw him. The killer, his figure tall and menacing, stalking her through the trees. Her heart stopped for a moment. She turned and ran, her legs burning as she sprinted through the dark woods. But no matter how fast she ran, he was always just behind her, his footsteps never faltering, his presence never far away. She glanced over her shoulder once more, only to find him much closer. Fear surged through her veins as she pushed herself harder, but the darkness closed in, and her body gave out. Before she could scream, before she could beg for mercy, the killer was on her, and everything went dark. One dark and quiet evening, Rose was home alone, casually scrolling through Instagram, enjoying the peaceful solitude of her room. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, "You really should close your windows." She paused, startled, her heart skipping a beat. She glanced around, a chill creeping up her spine, and typed back, "Who is this?" A response came almost immediately, "I like your blue t-shirt." Rose's breath caught in her throat. She was wearing a blue t-shirt. Panic flooded her as she realized someone was watching her at that very moment. She stood up, looking frantically around the room and at the windows, typing back with trembling fingers, "Seriously, who is this? What do you want?" The reply was unsettlingly direct, "I want you, Rose." Her stomach twisted. How did the person know my name? Then, in a sudden rush of desperate logic, she remembered Eric, her neighbor who had repeatedly asked her out despite knowing she had a boyfriend. Annoyance mixed with fear as she responded, "Eric, is this you? I've told you 100 times, I have a boyfriend. Leave me alone." But the reply she got was worse than she expected, "This isn't Eric." Her blood ran cold. Before she could even process her next move, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her boyfriend, James. "Hey babe, I'm so sorry. My car broke down on the way to your place. I'll be there soon." Relief mixed with fear, and she quickly texted him back, explaining everything. She told him about the disturbing messages, the eerie feeling that someone was watching her. James responded urgently, "Lock all the doors. Turn off the lights. I'll be there as soon as I can." Rose locked every door, shut the windows, and turned off all the lights, sitting in the darkened room with her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her heart pounding wildly. She was terrified but reassured by the thought that James would arrive any minute. After a few minutes, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from James, "I'm outside. Come open the door." Rose felt a wave of relief. She quickly texted back, "Did you see anyone? The person watching me must be outside somewhere." "No, I don't see anyone. Just come open the door, babe." Without a second thought, she rushed downstairs and unlocked the door. But the moment she opened it, a large figure lurched forward, grabbing her by the throat. In one horrifying instant, Rose realized the truth. The person who had been watching her had already ambushed James and taken his phone. Her vision blurred as the grip around her neck tightened, choking the air out of her. The last thing she saw was the stranger's face, twisted with a malicious grin as darkness overtook her. On Wednesday, August 21, 2024, it was Rachel's birthday, but her best friend Emily and Emily's boyfriend, Jake, were running late. They'd been stuck in an unyielding line of traffic on their way to the party. "We're never going to make it if we stay here," Jake muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He tapped his fingers impatiently before spotting a narrow road to the side, partially hidden by overgrown trees and dimly lit street lamps. A small, rusted sign read, "Grimwood Avenue." What they didn't know was that Grimwood Avenue was more than just a shortcut. It was infamous, a road marked with tragedies, whispered about in local news reports and on late-night radio shows. The road was dark and eerie, with thick, overgrown trees looming over it like shadows of forgotten secrets. Stories circulated that anyone who ventured down Grimwood Avenue often never made it out, vanishing without a trace, or meeting with bizarre, sometimes deadly, accidents. Locals said something, or someone, was rumored to prey on anyone who dared to cross its path. Unaware of the danger, they continued down the road, the trees closing in around them like dark curtains, blocking out the last traces of daylight. Emily was distracted by her phone buzzing in her hand. It was Rachel, calling to check in on their delay. "Where are you guys?" "It's getting late," Rachel said, her voice filled with a hint of worry. "We were caught in traffic," Emily explained, glancing over at Jake. "But Jake found a shortcut, so we're taking Grimwood Avenue. We should be there soon." There was a pause on the line, and then Rachel's voice turned serious. "Wait, did you just say Grimwood Avenue?" Emily confirmed, feeling a twinge of unease creep up her spine. "Turn back now," Rachel shouted. Her sudden, panicked tone startled Emily. "I saw something about that road on the news. They say it's cursed. People disappear or worse, something evil lurks there." Before Emily could process Rachel's words, she noticed a rotting wooden sign by the side of the road. The faded red letters spelled out, "Turn back." Her stomach knotted in dread as she quickly relayed Rachel's warning to Jake, telling him to turn the car around. Without hesitation, Jake made a sharp U-turn, determined to leave the road behind. But as he turned, they both spotted something, or rather, someone, standing near the edge of the trees. It was a woman, barefoot and dressed in a tattered, white gown, her hair matted and hanging loosely around her face. She stood completely still, her eyes locked onto them with a blank, eerie stare. "Did you see her?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped on the gas, trying to shake the image of the woman from his mind, as they sped down the road to get as far away from her as possible. Emily couldn't help but glance back through the side mirror. But the woman was gone, vanished without a trace. "She was just there a second ago," she murmured to herself, her pulse racing. But when she turned around to look at Jake, he was focused on driving, trying to keep his own fear at bay. As they sped down Grimwood Avenue, Emily's phone buzzed again. It was Rachel, her voice tense and filled with concern. "Did you get off the road?" she asked immediately. "No, not yet," Emily said, struggling to keep calm as she recounted the strange woman they'd just seen. She was mid-sentence when she gasped, her words catching in her throat. "Oh my God. What happened?" Rachel's voice demanded through the phone. Emily stared straight ahead, her eyes wide. "There's someone in the middle of the road," she whispered, her grip tightening on the phone. Up ahead, a shadowy figure stood blocking their path, unmoving. Jake's hands tightened around the steering wheel, and he muttered to Emily, "Hold on. I'll find another way out." He quickly turned the car again, desperately searching for an escape from this nightmare road. But Grimwood Avenue seemed endless, twisting and winding without an exit in sight. No matter which way he turned, they remained trapped. Emily's phone rang again. Rachel's worried voice filled the car. "Are you out yet?" "No," Emily cried. "We keep seeing people or something standing on the road. And now the car won't start." Fear clawed at her chest as Jake turned the key, again and again, but the engine refused to come to life. They were stranded, locked in place on that dark, desolate road. Rachel's voice rose in panic. "Lock the doors. Close the windows. I'll call the police, just hold on." Jake and Emily scrambled to lock the doors and roll up the windows, their breaths quick and shallow as they sat in the darkened car, every shadow outside feeling like it was closing in. But then, in the middle of the silence, they saw movement. A figure began approaching their car slowly, its footsteps heavy and deliberate, echoing in the darkness. As it got closer, they realized something was horribly wrong. The figure looked human in shape, but as it stepped into the faint light, they saw it wasn't human at all. It had the body of a person, but its face was twisted and monstrous, with the features of a wolf. Its eyes glowed with a menacing red, and a long, razor-sharp smile curled up its snout-like mouth as it stared through the car window at them. Emily and Jake held their breath, hoping it would go away. But then, slowly, it reached out a clawed hand and began pounding on the window. The glass shook under each hit, tiny cracks starting to spiderweb across the surface. "He's breaking through!" Emily screamed, clutching onto Jake's arm as they both cowered in fear. The creature's hand shattered the glass, and it reached inside, its claws digging into Emily's arm as it dragged her toward the broken window. She let out a blood-curdling scream, struggling against its grip, but it was no use. In a horrifying instant, the creature yanked her halfway through the window, silencing her cries as it pulled her into the darkness. Jake, paralyzed by fear, tried to open the door to escape, but before he could get out, the creature turned its gaze on him. It lunged forward, tearing the door open and dragging him out of the car with monstrous strength. When the police finally arrived on Grimwood Avenue, they found the car abandoned, the windows shattered, and the doors hanging open. There was no trace of Emily or Jake, only the faint smell of something rotten lingering in the air and strange claw marks scratched into the road. Grimwood Avenue had claimed 2 more lives, and the mystery of the cursed road remained as dark as ever.